Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Gaming News, where we discuss all things within the gaming industry. And today we have some information about Activision Blizzard, of course. We have a little bit of information about Epic Games, sort of. We also have some updates to the Artesian Builds situation. So, without further ado, let's get started. So the first discussion I would like to have today is about Activision Blizzard and being sold to Microsoft. So I have an article here from Axios where Activision Blizzard shareholders weigh Microsoft's dubious windfall. Now, I do like how these articles are laid out because it's very point form, succinct to the point of what needs to be covered in an article. And this is important because it's a referendum on a massive merger and the next steps in the exploration of fairness and consequence at the corporate level. So the shareholders vote on the merger, and that, at a glance, is the more straightforward of two key choices that will be made in these proceedings. And that is that stock owners will vote for or against selling the company to Microsoft for $69 billion. And that Activision Blizzard's board has advocated for the deal, though activist investors have urged a no. So the other major vote is non-binding, and it calls on shareholders to approve or turn down the golden parachute compensation for several top Activision executives. Now, those deals will allow the company's chief financial officer, chief executive officer, and top lawyer to all leave the merged company 6 months after the deal and collect millions. Now, this is interesting for a number of reasons, because that means that Bobby Kotick would obviously fall into the category of receiving that golden parachute. And if you recall that a couple of months back, we covered information regarding that contract that showed, depending on what happens with Activision Blizzard, will result in a different type of payout depending on what happens. And Bobby Kotick would stand to receive the most amount of money if a merger or an acquisition deal happened. And so he is hoping, like the other top execs, that they will continue to receive their golden parachute. As we may remember, Bobby Kotick and a number of top executives received a bonus based on performance that was on top of the salary that they were receiving per year or per quarter, per term, whatever it happened to be. And that was a substantial amount of money. And at some point, the board did allow for Bobby Kotick to continue to receive his bonus, even though he didn't meet the requirements for the performance evaluation that was to happen for that year, which is incredibly telling all told. Anyways, back to the article. Bundled into the merger plan is an eyebrow-raising agreement between Microsoft and Activision to pay Kotick a $22 million bonus in July or later if a board of directors subcommittee decides the company has sufficiently reformed its workplace. And remember, I just said that already the top executives, particularly Bobby Kotick, would receive a bonus based on performance. So this merger not only would garner him the several hundreds of millions of dollars that we covered as per the contract, depending on what happens with the company, but the fact that he will also stand to make another 22 million potentially in bonuses as well is incredibly interesting given the situation and given the number of lawsuits. Now, Some of the stockholders have urged a yes on the merger, but it's holding its nose at the potential payout. Others call it a dubious windfall, and that this doesn't quite fit in the current scale or form. And it continues, where do we go from here? And Activision is required to report the results of the vote within 4 business days, which is May 4th. Even with shareholder approval, the deal would need to clear regulatory hurdles, which is no sure thing. And beyond that, the window to close the deal is open until June 2023. So it goes to show you that there's still a lot of talks going on. Microsoft doesn't fully have Activision Blizzard at this moment in time, that there's still negotiation, that the shareholders still have to figure out what they're going to approve or disapprove. They're still going through at least one of the lawsuits that we have previously talked about. And I also wanted to alert all of you to another article that I came across about this, and this is from TechCrunch, and this was released on the 28th. And it talks about how, though today's vote is a meaningful step towards a successful deal for Activision Blizzard and Microsoft, the deal is still subject to regulatory review. The proposed transaction is expected to close before July 2023. Now, Bobby Kotick did talk about a couple of different things with respect to this, and he is quoted in here saying that the deal would provide even greater opportunities for their employees and to continue their focus on becoming an inspiring example of a welcoming, respectful, and inclusive workplace. And even the article writer here says that it's a wild statement coming from someone who runs a company facing numerous lawsuits for sexual harassment, retaliation, and discriminatory workplace practices. And I just tip my hat off to the writer of this article, who pulls no punches by saying such a thing. Anyways, in light of these conflicts, Kotick announced a zero-tolerance policy against harassment and a $250 million investment in recruiting gender-diverse talent. At the time, only 23% of employees identified as women or non-binary people, but employee dissatisfaction has prevailed. And I am really not surprised by this. This article does recap a little bit about Raven Software and how Activision Blizzard did not voluntarily recognize their union, meaning that they had to file for a union election with the National Labor Relations Board and hope that they could get somewhere. And I do believe that that was recognized by the NLRB. I believe that we covered that in a previous article. But still, it's no absolute sure thing that the deal is going to go through, and it puts into question a lot having to do with who is getting what money and what bonuses and at what time, and how long it's going to take to go through all of that, especially considering that they still have to resolve some of those lawsuits. And there's still more questions regarding the entire case. So I am really interested to see what happens moving forward, whether or not the shareholders are going to accept the bonuses and accept the deal, and how any of that is going to come about. But we are obviously going to keep an eye on this particular topic in the future, because more interesting things continue to pop up as the weeks move forward. Next up, we are going to talk about Epic Games and an interesting situation that has been brought to light by the Washington Post. And it came across my feed that an ex-Blizzard and Apple employee files a labor complaint about Epic Games. So let's take a look at this article. Former Activision Blizzard and Apple employee Cher Scarlett has filed a labor complaint with the National Labor Relations Board against Epic Games, accusing the Fortnite developer of refusing to hire her because of her labor advocacy and support of unions. Just to be clear before we continue, in Canada and I suppose in part in the United States, although I'm not sure to the degree, there are rules and laws that state that you are not allowed to discriminate against potential employees through the hiring process for their extracurricular activities. That said, there are many people who are going to look at your social media activity and decide based on that appearance whether or not you are hireable and whether or not you are good for the company. So immediately the response here is this is not a good start if you believe that your support of unions is a reason that you did not get hired in the first place. So let's continue with the article. Epic Games spokesperson Elka Lux confirmed that Scarlett did interview with the company, and she said the company was aware of Scarlett's labor advocacy early on in the job hiring process, and it did not impact the decision, which of course they're going to say, because if you are found to discriminate against a potential candidate because of something like that, especially since pro unionizing is not an inherently bad thing. If you were pro support of something that is vehemently railed against, then I could see that being a problem. However, being an activist for unionizing and treating people properly, I don't view as a problem. So if for some reason they said that it did factor into the hiring decision, they would be in for a world of hurt. But anyways, according to emails shared with the Post, on December 8th, a recruiting coordinator at Epic sent Scarlett an email with an attached request for activity form that asks for the disclosure of any efforts you take outside of work that may overlap with your potential role at Epic. So making sure that you're not going to be breaking rules between websites or between job positions, make sure there's no kind of conflict of interest. That is often information that needs to be disclosed to a company. I, as a freelance writer, have to constantly consider if I'm putting my portfolio and resume out there for gigs, that I have to make sure that one website is not going to conflict with the other in terms of content. So keep that in mind when we are looking at this situation. Anyways, the woman said, we offered the position to someone else who scored higher in their interviews, and we had received Scarlett's request for outside activities for him after we had already made a hiring decision for the position and had extended an offer to someone else. Basically saying that we were aware that you were involved with pro-unionizing. However, it didn't make an impact on our hiring decision, and we had already looked at another candidate who was perhaps better for the position. Now, providing the form to a candidate is not confirmation that an offer is forthcoming. So they're saying this because obviously, because Cher Scarlett has brought this to the National Labor Relation Board, that there is potential that she might bring information saying, well, it looked like I had the job, but once they knew that I was an activist for this thing, that's why I didn't receive it, and that is discrimination. So they are obviously making sure to show, or to say at least, that that is not confirmation of an offer. It's more just preemptively getting information so that if problems arise in future, they saw it coming, or it was a calculated risk, depending on what the situation is. Scarlett also has an NLRB charge filed on February 9th against Mozilla, similarly accusing the tech company of refusing to hire her due to her labor advocacy. She also has 3 open charges against Apple, accusing the iPhone creator of stopping attempts to gather wage data, of retaliating against workers, and creating a hostile work environment that forced her to leave in November of 2021. They are in the process of investigating the Mozilla, Epic, and Apple charges, and Apple and Mozilla did not respond to any request for comment in this situation. But a professor of labor and employee law, Risa Lieberwitz, said the evidence that the applicant went through a round of interviews, but then the employer hired someone else after learning about the union activity raises the question of whether the employer's refusal to hire her was motivated by her union activity. But it will depend on all of the evidence. And that is true. You need to be able to show that this was the cause. If they had already made a decision, if in court at the board they can bring forward the contract that was signed by the other candidate ahead of time before they received the request, then it had nothing to do with your union activities. And in a lot of cases, it can be scary for certain companies like Apple and like Amazon who may not like or agree with unionizing, and of course, Blizzard not being big fans of unionizing either, that this would be potentially a problem for these companies because then they would be forced to be on the level, and maybe they don't want to do that. And I'm not saying that that is right, but it's certainly a motivation for this kind of thing. And if you feel like you've been considerably discriminated against, I actually feel like there is probably more to this story than just this. But the National Labor Relation Board has received a number of recent complaints regarding video game companies. For example, last week, Nintendo was accused of violating a worker's legal rights to form a union. The worker's name was kept anonymous in the complaint, and Nintendo responded that it was not aware of any attempts to unionize and that the worker was terminated for disclosing confidential information. So, when it comes to unionizing and companies and wage disparity, etc., there are all kinds of moving parts within the hiring process that I don't know exactly what goes on and why people will hire one person over another. I am not a video game developer to know that kind of thing, but if any of these are successful, it would lead you to believe that some of these companies really still do not like the idea of unions, and maybe that's why unionizing for video gaming has been so difficult, even though the community, the people have been asking for this to be a thing for years now, industry wide. It has not come to fruition. So we'll have to keep an eye on what happens with this particular case. I am curious to see what happened. I do know that Cher Scarlett has accepted a position at another company and is working on a video game right now, and it makes me wonder if there's reason to still pursue some of these complaints, because if you've already received a job, it doesn't mean that they should get away with things or that unions aren't important to the gaming industry. I am all for the idea of unionizing in gaming. In fact, I've written about it. But I'm just curious why there is a push to continue down this way if you now are already working at a place that you are comfortable and happy with, and maybe you're looking to put yourself in a better position. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens in future, if any of these are dropped or not. And ultimately what happens within the gaming community, because there's a lot of things happening in multiple different studios. Next up, we're going to talk about Artesian Builds. So, Artesian Builds, as you may recall, came under fire when they did their regular giveaway of an Artesian Build high-end computer and had a contest for their partners or their affiliates to the program that they could enter these contests and potentially get a swanky new computer. And unfortunately, what ended up happening was the community did not receive the giveaway stream very well, as one of the executives, if you will, of the company basically pulled a name and said, this person is not worthy of our rigs and not worthy of our time and barely even reaches the threshold. And you know what? We're going to pull a different name to get this awesome computer. And that was Kia Pia. And Kia Pia is a wonderful woman who obviously railed against it, and it garnered a lot of attention. And as a result, not only was she sent a number of custom built PCs by a number of different companies, but it also elevated her numbers drastically on Twitch and on Twitter, and she ended up gaining partner status. Not long after that, Artesian Builds was obviously in a world of trouble when the government found out that Artesian Builds has been doing some shady things and not paying some of its taxes, and because of everything that came to light because of the big stink, put Artesian Builds into a situation where it fired and laid off a number of its people, and it put into question whether or not some of the PCs were going to be sent to the people who had earned them through giveaways or had purchased them. Some of these people had to file with their credit card companies to get their money back potentially. And now we are at a point where Artesian has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And here is Unicourt, which details the case number, the filing date, the status of the case, and what type of case it is, and it shows bankruptcy. It shows the judge that will be presiding over the case, the debtors, the trustee, who is not yet, assigned, the U.S. trustee, the attorney, any of the court documents, and then any of the docket entries. So obviously this is a serious issue where Artesian is having to deal with the fallout because they didn't want to give someone a PC, so it was kind of their fault, but they were clearly not doing incredibly well to begin with. So I also have an article here from PC Gamer, which is that Artesian Builds files for bankruptcy with an estimated $1.3 million in unfulfilled orders. So last Friday, a shuttered custom PC maker Artesian Builds filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in California with over $3 million in liabilities on its balance sheets. That's liabilities is owing, including an estimated $1.37 million in unfulfilled orders, according to documents included with the filing. This article goes on to talk about what happened to lead to this, and two ex-employees who spoke to PC Gamer under the condition of anonymity said that Noah Katz's long-term mismanagement that put the company in such a precarious position. And we're not really surprised by this. I have heard and read a number of different complaints about Noah Katz and his style of being CEO, and admitting that he was inexperienced, which it does say right here in the article. and has said so as much himself that he was inexperienced. And this potentially is part of the reason why the company has gone under or filed for this bankruptcy. So, according to documents filed by Artesian, the company lost over 1.6 million last year, which is a significant number, especially given that you're still in the height of the pandemic. It owes over $450,000 to two PC components distributors and holders of over $200,000 in credit card debt. There is also a 1.2 million secured family loan on the books, and it owes time off to ex-employees. Some of them did get their final paychecks according to research that they had done, but an estimated $1.37 million in deferred revenue from unfulfilled orders is showing in the latest balance sheet. So, in the now stripped down Artesian Builds Discord server, a few customers have said they managed to get their money back by requesting chargebacks from their credit card companies. There's at least hundreds of gaming PC orders that were never shipped, said one ex-employee, and that is not a good place to be. But given that supply issues have genuinely been a problem for the last few years, especially with respect to GPUs, according to two ex-Artesian workers that PC Gamer spoke to, another problem that facilitated this bankruptcy was that CATS was selling cryptocurrency mining systems, which further delayed gaming PC orders. So, the important thing to know here is that the filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy allows the company to continue operating while paying its debts according to a plan negotiated with creditors. So they have been shuttered since early March, and the chief restructuring officer handling the company's affairs indicated to PC Gamer that its assets, including trade names, will be sold. I feel like the debts that they had incurred would have eventually been found out, but all it took was the CEO to be a jerk and to say on stream, oh, you're not a big enough person for us to give you a PC, and therefore it put Artesian Builds in the spotlight and ultimately screwed over the company and screwed over a lot of those people. And I hope that you feel good about yourself, Noah Katz, because you not only screwed over tons of customers because you wanted to get ahead. Like, I don't know what your motivation was, but it was scummy as fuck. And I hope that you eject yourself from the gaming industry and from the tech industry, because you've done not only the customers a giant disservice, you are not an incredibly good CEO, and as we've seen, CEOs are not exactly model citizens, and you've also screwed over a lot of really good employees who probably took pride in their job, and you ruined all of that. For what? That's my question. Now you have to deal with the consequences. You're probably not going to have another position like that for a very long time because you've just not proven that you can do the job. So I'm curious to see what any of you think about Artesian Builds and what happens moving forward. I hope, for the sake of the people that used to work for Artesian, who were probably incredibly good employees, that they have landed on their feet and have found positions that are more worth their time than this company and working with this guy. But I would love to know what any of you think about the situation, because I don't think it's done yet, and I do want to see what happens as a result, and if any of this money is going to be able to be recuperated, and if people are going to be compensated for legitimate purchases that they have made. But with that, thank you so much for being part of the Patreon. You have been amazing, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.